Alright, what's going on, guys? Today I'm going to do something I've been wanting to do for a long time. I've had quite a few people ask me to do this over the last year or so. It's make a tuning guide. Now, bear with me because I don't think I'm very good at explaining things, so a lot of this might not make any sense to you, but I'm going to try my best to let you know how I personally like to tune my vehicles. First off, I'm going to start with some basic upgrades I like to make for my cars. To start off with, I'm in my 2005 Ford GT. I have my S1 road racing tune on it. It's supposed to be more of a grip-based platform as opposed to a complete speed racer. This is more geared towards circuit racing. But just first off, the things I usually like to do. This is very universal. Unless all-wheel drive is like prohibited, I convert every single thing to all-wheel drive. It's just the best thing to do for racing. I think rear-wheel drive, especially off-road, is just ridiculous. You don't want to do it. You're going to spin out. It's going to be harder to get the power down. And all-wheel drive handles better, launches faster. The only downside is going to be top speed. Front-wheel drive is not very good either. But I convert everything to all-wheel drive if it's not already all-wheel drive. And the next thing that I always like to have upgraded if I can are tires. Like this is an S1 class car, road racing like I mentioned earlier. So for this particular setup I have the slick racing tires, which are new to this game. But I always upgrade tires if I can. Like slick racing tires sometimes isn't the best thing to do if you can squeeze out more performance from other aspects of the build. But if I'm on road, you know, if I can, like if it's a higher end build like S1, S2, and racing tires are available, I always go for it. Like slicks in this case would be good, or even just a regular Horizon semi-slick, the traditional Forza Horizon racing tires. Those are also very good. If I'm doing rally racing, like dirt racing, I almost always try to get rally tires on there unless I can't really afford it, and unless it kind of puts the rest of the build kind of on crutches where I'm kind of bottlenecked a little bit. I won't use rally tires. But again, if it's a higher end build, dirt racing, I like rally tires. And in this game, they have off-road tires you can kind of put on anything. And you can kind of put these on just about any car, I think. So off-road tires are also very good. Like for this game, if I'm doing cross-country racing, I would put off-road tires on. But also I've found a few instances where I've put off-road tires for dirt racing and they work just almost as well as the rally tires do. But there we go. I think always upgrade your tires if you can, even if it's just one step forward like sport tires. If you're doing road racing, I recommend it. Dirt racing, I recommend rally or off-road. Road racing, I definitely recommend some kind of racing tire if you can. And for snow road racing, snow tires are also a good option. See, other basics I like to do. Usually if I can, I like to make the cars as light as possible. So you see for this build I have the weight reduction, the max weight reduction installed. You know, that's 620 pounds you're saving right there. A lot of people like to put their emphasis on more power. I prefer to have a lightweight car that handles really good, that's decently fast, as opposed to a super fast car that handles like shit. I think grip beats speed in almost every situation, unless it's like a straight line top speed run, then grip is going to beat speed just about every time. So going along with the all-wheel drive and the tires, I like to have max weight reduction if I can. If not, the next step, sport weight reduction, I think it's always a necessity for me in pretty much every application. Springs are something I also upgrade on absolutely every build I do. I think on like Horizon 4 there were only maybe 2 builds total where I didn't upgrade to springs. If I'm doing road racing, I put race springs on. I don't care if it's, in this game it's not that big of a penalty, it's only 1 point, but like in past it was like 3 to 5 points sometimes, and I would still do that. I'd make up for it. I use race springs for road racing obviously, and if I'm doing dirt racing or cross country racing, I always use rally springs as well. Drift springs if you drift. It's obviously the right way to go. I don't do drifting pretty much in this game, even though my name kind of, you know, you make you think I would, but I don't. But if I was drifting, I would put drift springs on. And Anti-roll bars, I always have race anti-roll bars in every build I do. That's another just necessity I always try to look for. In this game in particular, we can look at brakes, race brakes. I almost always upgrade the brakes to the highest capacity. In this case, race brakes would be the highest, but there's some where it's like sport brakes. Sometimes I'll make the sacrifice and go to sport brakes, but I usually always upgrade the brakes to some degree. Let's see, so other things I almost always do, add some kind of aerodynamic feature. In this game, I don't really like running front and rear spoilers together. I think in this case having the front bumper is great, but you could also flip it and have just the rear spoiler, but I usually like to have one or the other. Usually in this game it seems to be I have a lot more of the front racing splitter as opposed to having the back one, but usually always have one or the other for road racing. For dirt racing it kind of depends, but still more or less the same thing. I like to have a lot of the front racing splitter. For off-road, I don't really look at aerodynamics as much as I normally would, but sometimes I will still like to have one or the other. Another big thing I like to change, the transmission. You can have all the power in the world, but if you don't have a good transmission, you're not going to go anywhere. So this game has a lot of different variety. In previous Horizon games, you had like a stock transmission, or you had a sport transmission and then a race transmission. In this one you have many options. For this particular car, I found the 10-speed transmission to be the most efficient. Just find one that matches your preference. I usually look for one that shifts the fastest, but also keep in mind that the more gears you have, the heavier it's going to be. But I always change the transmission if I can. There's very rare instances where I don't change it to at least a sport transmission, because I always adjust the final drive ratio on every build. I'll get more into that here in a minute. Drive line is another thing I like to change. Now, like I said, after I got my basics out of the way that I always like to change, I will look into, you know, if I have a lot of points left, to look to see which engine's best. I'm not going to go into every single engine possibility for this particular car. For this one I have a stock setup, but yeah, I always start with all-wheel drive conversion, look for good tires, maximum weight reduction if I can. That's always my pecking order of things I like to check off for almost every build I do. Some sort of upgraded springs, upgraded brakes, good transmission. And another thing I like to do, a lot of people, if they have like 6, 7, 8 points left or so, they will try to find some sort of engine component to give them more power, like race intakes 2 points, or see, like a fuel system in this case would be 3-point improvement. Usually if I have 3 to 5 to 10, you know, around that range, if I can, instead of upgrading power, I like to do more things to cut weight. Like I will find like the lightest wheels I can, or I will find like a carbon drive line or a flywheel, something, whatever kind of gives me the most weight off, the most decrease in weight, I like to go with as well. I will also say another thing I forgot to mention, differential is something I change in absolutely every build as well. This game does a very good job of giving you kind of a pre-configured diff for different types of racing. Before, you were either stuck with a stock diff. It's in previous Horizon games, you had like a stock diff, 1.5-way limited slip diff, or a 2-way limited slip diff. In this game you have, I'm pretty sure all of them are 2-way limited slip differentials, but they're geared for different types of racing. This one, the race diff, and this one's actually not a 2-way, but like they have a race diff mainly for road racing, a drift one for drifting, off-road diff for off-road racing, and then some cars even have a rally diff for more towards dirt racing. So depending on your desired discipline for whatever build you're making, you can pick that specific one for a good general guideline, a good general baseline to go with. So like for this one I have a race diff because it's going to be a road racing car. Okay, let's jump into the tuning part of it. Now for tires, I don't usually mess with anything on the tires that often because, number one, I don't play with tire wear or fuel consumption on, so I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference if you change the pressures or not. However, I will say, if you do play with tire wear, on, or if you still want to mess with tire pressures, having a lower pressure, your tires are going to heat up quicker. They're going to have more rubber in contact with the road, but they're not going to last as long. If you have higher pressures, you're going to have less rubber in contact with the road. They're going to take a longer time to heat up, but they're going to last a lot longer. I will say, as a general rule of thumb, I'd prefer to have lower pressure in the front, higher in the rear, to kind of help keep the car a little more balanced in a turn. It kind of makes cornering a little easier, but it's all going to come down to preference. Again, I don't mess with tire pressure that often. Now for gearing, I've said this before in other videos, I do this like the laziest way possible. After I have chosen my desired transmission, I hardly ever individually mess with the gears. What I will do is adjust the final drive ratio in the transmission. Basically, that can pretty much universally controls all the gears together, and what I will try to do is I will tinker with it to find the lowest possible 0 to 60 and 0 to 100 mile per hour times that I can for the most part. As you see here, I'm making it go down. As you see, I went to 3.8 for the final drive, and the 0 to 60 and 0 to 100 went down. So for me, that would be optimal. I will keep doing this until I find the lowest possible setting. So it looks like for this specific car, it's 3.75 or 3.8 on the final drive is kind of the sweet spot. It's also kind of inconsistent in this game. I feel like sometimes it'll say 5.98, you can save it, go back, it'll say it's like 5.6. It's never really accurate in this game, but that is what I like to do, find the lowest possible combination of those two without just completely butchering the speed. So you might be able to, I'm not going to do it, but say I went all the way up, I might be able to take the acceleration, have it super high, where in some, or have it really low, and in some instances it'd be more of a problem if you had it all the way high. But say you have the low 0 to 60 time, but you're on like a track that is more high speed. If you're hitting like the rev limiter, your car is topping out on top speed, you can go back in. Like if that happens to me, I will go back in and I will lower it to where I think the desired top speed will be without hitting the limiter. So usually what I like to do is, as a general overview, I like to adjust the final drive to find the lowest possible 0 to 60, 0 to 100 times, unless I'm in a race where the top speed is like more of a priority. I will kind of adjust it accordingly to not be on the rev limiter, where you could potentially be going faster and losing time. So that more or less sums up how I tune the gear ratios on my car. Let's go over to alignment. This is where things start to get a little complicated. Having negative camber on your alignment can help your car turn in a little more. Camber affects the vertical angle of your tire. So if you're looking at the tires straight on, if you had negative camber, you're going to kind of bow out a little bit. You're going to be able to have a better angle of the tire making contact with the road. So that would generally be what you want if you want better turn-in response. Positive would be the opposite of that. You're not going to have very much turn-in response, but it might be better for certain scenarios. Like if you watch NASCAR, for example, you'll notice they're right front, they have a lot of negative camber to support the right tires being on the track for such a banked track like they run on. Like if they're at Talladega or Daytona, super high bank track, they have negative camber on the right side to keep the wheels in contact with the road, and they have positive camber on the left side to combat the other side of the car to deal with the banking. So like in this game in particular, I don't think I've ever added positive camber. It doesn't really seem like it'd be much of a benefit. I like to have negative camber on everything. If I'm doing road or dirt racing, I usually like to start off with a -2 degrees on the front, -1.5 degree on the rear. If I'm doing cross country, I will change it. Like I will show an example. I will go to an off-road build I have for a Ford Bronco. You'll get alignment. For this, I have it at a -1.5, -1 combination. So I feel like off-road, having a little less negative camber can make it just a little more predictable, a little easier to control for more of the straight line racing. But if I'm on a tight technical track, I'd like to have the alignment be more like -2, -1.5. I feel like it just gives you enough extra security on the turns, turning in. It makes cornering just a little easier. I'll also show an example of a very high-speed car, the McLaren Senna I used for a trial video a couple weeks ago. This one, super high-powered car, I like to have a little bit more negative camber for like circuits. It makes it just a little better to turn on higher speed tracks. I have a -3 degree and -2 degree split for this particular car. Also keep in mind, camber and toe for that matter, if you adjust it too much, it can also affect how your tires wear. So if you play with tire wear, having more negative or positive camber and toe can also wear your tires quicker, so keep that in mind. But like I said, I usually like to have -2, -1.5 for road, and then it can be a little less for dirt and cross country, and a little more for a super high powered vehicle. For toe, this affects how the angle of the tires pretty much horizontally. So if you have, a lot of toe in, like it says actually on the screen right now, it'll bring the front of the tires closer together than the backs. If you have toe out, it'll be the other way around. It can also affect how the car responds into going into a turn, going into a corner, but I never change the toe. It wears tires quicker as well, but I don't play with tire wear, but I still don't really adjust toe too much. I don't think it really changes a whole lot in this game for the good. Now caster angle, this is where it also starts to get a little bit spicy, a little interesting here. For me, what I've found, the higher the angle, the higher the degree the caster angle is set to, the snappier your steering response is going to be. It's going to be more sudden. It's going to be a little just quicker. But it's also, I feel like it kind of limits how much turning you can actually do, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to keep the McLaren Senna thing on the screen here. This is a super high powered car. You're going super fast. Look at it this way: if you're on a track with a lot of like slalom turns, you're making quick turns going from left to right, or if you're doing a street race and you have oncoming traffic coming your way, you want to be able to get out of the way as quick as possible. So if you have a higher angle, like for this car I have 7, that's as high as you can go, it'll be more sudden when you turn the wheel, it'll be more direct, it'll be more responsive, you can get out of the way a lot quicker. As if you have it more towards a lower angle, like if you have it at 4 or 5, you're going to turn the wheel, it's going to take just a little bit longer for your car to respond and get out of the way fully. So lower the angle, it's going to be a little slower for your turning to respond, your steering to respond, but you're going to have more steering to work with, if that makes any sense. I know it probably makes no sense at all the way I'm explaining it, but generally for me, the lower powered vehicle or the less grippy it is, I like to have a lower number where I can kind of finesse the steering a little bit more. So like I have the Senna on here, high powered car, very grippy. I like to have a super high number so I can kind of make sudden moves where you need to be more responsive with your steering. If I go to back to my Ford GT, I'll go to the alignment for that. For whatever reason, I think 5 is the sweet spot for this car. If I have it too high, I feel like even though the steering's more responsive, it's not going to be as efficient because I can't turn the wheel as much on like certain swooping turns. I think 5 is a good happy medium. But generally for me, if the higher powered vehicle or the grippier it is, I like to have a higher number so I can make more sudden movements. But if the car is less grippy, or if it's slower, or even if it's a bigger car, I like to have a lower number because I want the steering to be a little slower where I can kind of finesse it a little more and it's not going to be limited, if that makes any sense at all. Like a good example would be if you have like Mercedes-Benz Unimog, like that thing is huge. It's going to have a lower caster angle because you're going to want to turn that wheel and have as much play in the steering as you can. If you have it at like a 7, it's going to try to be more responsive, but it's not going to be because there's not going to be enough play. When you turn the wheel, it's not going to go very far. It's just not going to have as much steering to actually work with. So I hope that explains it. It's generally higher powered vehicle, grippier vehicle. You want to have a higher angle, it's going to be more responsive. Slower vehicles, or ones that aren't as downforce centered, ones that are kind of harder to control, having a lower one is generally better. Also dirt racing, off-road racing, I usually like to have it a little higher as well, just to kind of be more aggressive on the wheel. I can kind of send it into a turn a little better. It'll be set up better for a turn. You can kind of just pitch the car in and get it sideways a little better to, going into a hard dirt turn or something like that. Okay, anti-roll bars. So this affects how your car pretty much responds into a turn. Like if you didn't have anti-roll bars, you go hard into a really fast turn, your car is going to roll over. Having anti-roll bars, sway bars, is going to keep the car kind of balanced. It's going to try to keep it balanced without sliding over. It's going to try to keep it more composed. I don't usually mess with anti-roll bars that much. I will say, if you want the car to be a little more aggressive, you can kind of make the front a little softer, make the rear a little stiffer. It'll make the car a little more aggressive into a turn. You can push it a little harder. But if you have too drastic of a change, the car is going to become unstable and the tires could lift off the ground. You could end up kind of, losing traction, so it wouldn't be very good. So I don't mess with that too much. Horizon does a pretty good job, I think, overall, of giving you a good baseline for anti-roll bars. And you don't really need to make too drastic a change with them generally, but sometimes there might be some exceptions, but I usually don't mess with them that much. For springs here, this is one where things can get very tricky. Things change a lot. For my personal preference, I like to have springs be certain values for different racing applications. First off, springs and damping are going to control how your car handles bumps, how your car handles certain terrain, and how your car shifts its weight. So if you're racing on road, you have a nice smooth road surface generally, you want to have stiffer springs. You're going to want your car's weight to transfer easier going through fast turns. There's not going to be very many bumps to deal with, so you want your car to be stiffer, because if you're a bit softer, it's going to be a little more sluggish, a little more boaty. So just generally, road surface, I like to have stiffer springs. If I'm doing dirt or off-road, I like to have softer springs. Also keep in mind that you're going to want to have stiffer springs where the weight is. So for this particular car, Ford GT here, I have the engine's in the rear. It's a mid-engine car, rear engine car, whichever one you want to call it. And so I have stiffer springs in the rear to help support the weight of the car. And you have softer springs in the front because it's not as heavy up front. So you're going to want to have heavier springs to support the weight. So if I go over here, I will show you my GT500 Mustang. It's also a road racing car. So you will notice that the springs are still going to be pretty stiff, but more weight is going to be in the front of the car. So I do have stiffer springs in the front as opposed to the Ford GT has stiffer in the rear. This also will determine the balance between oversteer and understeer. So for example, for that Ford GT, since I have the engine in the back, if I were to make the springs a lot stiffer in the front and have them softer in the rear, where it looks more like the setup I have here for the GT500, the car is going to be a lot more out of control when I'm cornering. If I'm doing a lot of hard braking, doing a lot of hard turning, the car is going to want to lose traction because it's not going to be balanced. The weight's not going to be supported where it needs to be, so it's going to be all sorts of out of control. So just generally, you're going to have more weight, stiffer springs where the weight is mainly going to be at. So if the engine's in the front, have stiffer springs in the front. If the engine's in the rear, have stiffer springs in the rear. I like to have the springs and the damping pretty much the same value, if that makes any sense, or in the same spot. If you look here, I'm gonna stay here on the Mustang. Next, I'm going to go back to the Ford GT. I'm going to go back to that one, show you that real quick. If you look at the springs here, I have the springs and the damping, just the rebound stiffness and the springs I usually like to have in the same spot. It's just, for me, it keeps the car balanced, and for the bump stiffness, for whatever reason, I like to have it kind of half of the value of the rebound stiffness. I think it's just, it keeps the car balanced. It keeps the suspension balanced. It kind of helps it, be suited for whatever terrain I'm on. So let's go back here. I'm gonna look at an off-road application. We go to the Ford Bronco. Look at the spring and damping setup for this car. If you look at the springs, I have them a lot softer than I do for like the Mustang or the Ford GT, because you're off-road, the terrain's going to be a lot less predictable. It's going to be a lot harsher. It's going to be a lot harder. So you're going to want to have softer springs and softer damping to help absorb those bumps and help keep the wheels in contact with the road going over the rough terrain. So if you're off-road, you're going to have a softer setup for both of them. Now, having like my springs and damping in proportion to one another, that's just kind of a preference. But it does make sense to kind of have a soft damping in relation to a soft springs, or vice versa. Have it, if you have a stiffer spring setup, have stiffer damping as well. But either way, I like to keep the bump stiffness about half the value of the rebound stiffness. I will go here and I will show you the Ford Focus, which is a dirt racing application. You will see that the springs and damping setup are very similar to that of the Bronco. They're both pretty much the same ratio in terms of the spring and the damping being as soft as they are. Now, for ride height, it's generally a good idea to, if you're on road, you're going to want the car as low as possible. It's going to handle a lot better without the car bottoming out. So if you have the car slammed to the ground, you're on like a very rough track, or if you're off-road, the car's going to be bottoming out. It's going to be bouncing up and down. It's going to be, potentially flipping over or whatever. So if you're on the road, it's good to have the car as low as possible. For me, if I'm doing dirt racing, I like to have it kind of more in the middle. If I'm doing cross country, I like to have the ride height very great, almost all the way to the high, a little bit less than high, like I will show you here. Go back to the Ford Bronco for the ride height, and you'll see it's almost all the way up. Higher ride height, it's going to be, the car's not going to really lose. The car's going to stay in contact with the road because it's going to have more suspension travel. It's also going to handle jumps a little better. So generally off-road, you're going to have a higher ride height. If you're on road surface, like an asphalt, pavement, whatever, you're going to have lower. You're going to keep the car balanced and keep the car pretty much as close to the ground as possible. That's just generally how I like to tune my springs. Now if I go, and damping for that matter. Now if I go over to Aero, I'm going to jump back over here to the Ford GT. This car has the adjustable front bumper or splitter. So what I like to do, and this goes even if I have a rear spoiler as well. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go to the GT500 since I have both aerodynamic pieces installed on that car. Now let's see. Let me find it here. Alright, so this car has the rear spoiler that's adjustable and the adjustable front bumper. So what I like to do, I feel like it's generally works for me to, well, this one actually doesn't have the front bumper, damn. But what I like to do is I'll add a little bit more downforce to the front and take a little bit off the rear. So if I had both of them, I would add 5 pounds of downforce to the front, and I would take 5 pounds off to the rear. I think it kind of keeps that ratio that I like as for oversteer just right, and it doesn't really keep the car too slow. It doesn't keep it doesn't have it drag too much. It's just I feel like it's good for me. If you don't change it, it's still gonna be pretty good. But mainly downforce, how it works is your car is going to be grippier, it's going to have faster acceleration, but it's going to be slower top speed wise. So the more downforce you add, your car is going to handle better. It's going to accelerate faster, but it's not going to be as fast top speed wise. And if you take downforce off, the car is going to be a little harder to control. It's going to be a little freer. Not going to accelerate quite as well, but it's going to be faster overall. So how you adjust your downforce is going to kind of depend on how you want your car to handle. If you want it to be a little grip, if you want it to be a little easier to control, I would say add a little bit. And if you want it to be faster, you can take a little off, or just not have any aerodynamic pieces at all. This is how I tune my aerodynamic pieces. Moving on to brakes. I usually don't change the brake balance a whole lot unless I'm either drifting, which I don't do very often, or if I'm on like a dirt track, I will sometimes adjust it. If you add brake bias to the front, the car is going to be set up to understeer. It's not going to be able to enter a turn quite as well, which is not really good at all. I don't recommend understeer is never really good. But if you have the braking bias more towards the rear, the car is going to be set up to enter a turn with more oversteer. So if I'm on a super high speed track with lots of turns, sometimes I will have it more towards the rear where the car will enter a turn a little better, and it's not going to understeer. And I'm not going to lose as much time trying to enter a turn, but generally I keep it in the middle. If I'm on dirt racing though, if I'm doing like a transition from road to dirt and I want to get the car sideways, pitch it into a turn, if I don't want to use e-brake, having a little brake bias towards the rear can also achieve that. But generally I don't mess with it that much. Braking force I don't mess with either, as I play with ABS. If I had ABS turned off, you can adjust the braking force to keep your brakes from not locking under excessive load, but again, I don't mess with it too much. Now if we move on to differential settings, differential controls how the power is transferred to the wheels. This car, and almost every car I tune all-wheel drive, is going to have 3 different differentials. It's going to have a front diff, a rear diff, and a center diff to help distribute more towards the front or the rear. If you had a rear-wheel drive car, you would only have a rear differential. If you have a front-wheel drive car, you only have a front differential. So for acceleration and deceleration, if you have higher values, higher percentage, it's going to be a stronger differential. It's going to lock easier. It's going to encourage the wheels to spin more under acceleration or deceleration, depending on which setting you're adjusting. It's going to cause oversteer, but you're getting more power down to the ground. If you have lower values, lower percentage, it's not going to be locked. It's going to be more of a looser feeling transmission, or differential, excuse me, and the wheels are going to spin more independently from one another. They're not going to be spinning at such a higher speed. It's going to be generally easier to control. We're going to have less power to the road surface being transferred. So kind of trying to find the balance between the two is kind of a tricky thing to do. Personally for me, I like to have a much lower value of lock in the front as opposed to the rear. Looking here at my GT500, having the front differential lock less under acceleration, it's going to take harder for the differentials to lock. They can be more independent. It's going to be easier to go into a turn. It's going to handle a little easier. And under deceleration, if you have a low value on the front, the car is going to, when you're not on the gas, it's going to want to tend to oversteer a little bit. It's going to be easier to turn when you're not on the gas. It's not going to be kind of stuck, I guess, if you're not accelerating. And if you have also going apart with that, having the rear, if you have higher values on the rear as opposed to having lower values on the front, or overall having, for me, putting 2 and 2 together here, I'm trying to explain this, having lower percentage values in the front, higher in the rear, the front tire is going to be more independent. Usually they're not going to be spinning as fast as the rear. It's going to be easier to go into a turn when you're on the gas or off the gas. Having the higher values, it's going to make the rear tires spin more under acceleration and deceleration, so it's going to be easier to come out of a turn with more power down to the road. So looking at this, for the GT500, having the lower values, going into a turn, if I'm hard braking into a turn, usually what I like to do in road racing, I like to brake, and then I usually like to let off the gas, let the car kind of coast into the turn with the wheel turned. It's going to turn a little easier having the deceleration values low on the front and have them higher in the rear. The car is going to want to oversteer into the turn, and then once I'm past that apex, I can mash the brake. The rear tire is going to be spinning faster, and I can in the front it's not going to be spinning as fast. So going out of the turn, I can get more power down and it's kind of hard to explain. It really is. But for this specific setup for road racing, it allows you to go into a turn easier, let off the gas, and then as soon as you get past that apex where the car's oversteering into the turn, you're almost out of the turn, you can punch it and get the power down and go exit the turn with good control. It's not going to be out of control. How you want your differential to be tuned is going to be more towards how you want the power to be down, if you want your car to oversteer into a turn. If you're one of the people that don't ever, let off the gas in a turn, having higher deceleration values would be better because the differential is it's going to lock a lot quicker, so it's going to be continued to spin at such a high speed. You don't have to worry about it. But like, say you're on a super fast turn and you have the wheel cranked. If your car is oversteering or understeering and the car feels like it's not going to make the turn all the way, sometimes you might be like, oh crap, I need a brake just to get that car rotated and finish the turn. If you have differential settings similar to mine here, if you let off the gas, the car will start to oversteer and you can complete the turn without having to brake. It's just pretty much how this differential setup is going to work. I like to have a fairly high percentage of the rear differentials and a lower percentage of the front to keep the rear tires lock up faster and have the front ones lock up a lot slower, just to kind of keep it balanced and have that oversteer. And it just overall it feels good. That's how I like it. And for distribution, if you have the differential more towards the rear, it's going to handle more like a rear-wheel drive car. If you have the balance centered more towards the front, it's going to handle more like a front-wheel drive car. So I will show you an example. If I go over to my Ford Bronco differential, you'll notice that everything is completely maxed out. I feel like for whatever reason, having off-road vehicles, you're not really going to be you're not going to be off the throttle very much. You're either going to be on the throttle or you're going to be braking. So I feel like having the differential settings cranked all the way to 100, it just feels good for off-road. It's composed, and having a nice even split of 50 is also just the way to go for off-road, just to suit my preference. Like in past Horizon games, they didn't have the off-road diff, so you had to manually make it crank all the way up. But in this one, with the off-road diff, it's pre-configured to be 100% like that all the time. So for dirt racing, I'll go back to the Ford Focus here. This one by default, there's no rally diff for this car, which is kind of unfortunate, but it has, I went for the off-road differential. And dirt racing and cross country, similarly, I like to have the rear be all the way maxed out, and then I will make the front lock up just a little bit easier under acceleration than I would for a road racing car, because you don't really need to finesse it as much, at least in my opinion. So this is just the balance that works for me. This is the dirt racing, how I like to have it, pretty much have the differential tuned, and then I will go back to cross country, how I like to have it tuned, and then for road racing, how I like to have it tuned. Again, it's going to kind of come down to preference. I will say for the balance, that's going to be the one where it's probably going to affect it the most. If you have it too far towards the rear, the car is going to oversteer maybe too much. You're going to potentially spin out, and it's going to be harder to control. But if you have it more towards the front, the car is going to understeer way too much. It's going to feel like you're doing everything you can to turn, and it's just not going to go anywhere. So it's all going to come down to kind of what you want, how you want your car to handle, how you want it to handle into a turn, handle coming out of a turn. It's all this stuff is going to be kind of preference. I'm just showing you how I like to tune my vehicles personally. I will say, going back to the dirt racing diff, I'll go back to the focus diff here. Having the deceleration all the way to 100, I will say if it's a higher powered vehicle, like if I had an S2 dirt racer, I would bring a deceleration down a little bit just to kind of help it handle a little bit easier. It makes it just overall general vehicle control is going to be a little bit better. Well, that's the end of that. Hopefully you guys did learn something. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down in the comments. I will try to help you as best I can. Again, it's hard to explain some of these things. You kind of just have to, try different combinations, mess with things, and see what best suits you. But hopefully this helped you to some degree. Yeah, let me know down in the comments how you feel about it, if you learned anything, and if you want more specific videos on jumping even deeper into certain topics of tuning, let me know. I'll see you guys Thursday for a trial video.